There are some refreshments in the back. If you get a lime seltzer water, you might be taking your life in your own hands. I dropped them. I got rid of the dented cans, but just beware on those ones. The other ones are good. Oh, you're good. You made it. So please help yourself. And clearly, if you look at that, I got some comfort food. Kind of goes with the topic. It wasn't by purpose, but running through Troopies. Yes, running through Troopies. I had a nice shirt to put on. Dropped it in the parking lot, so I'm still waiting for the U.S. to call to put me in at 7:30 in their game versus Vancouver. When I get the call, pulled up on the bench. Well, thank you all for coming. A little bit about why we're here. My name is Kate Casey. I have a couple hats in the district, which gives me the opportunity to work with numerous kids from 3rd and 4th grade all the way up through high school, and seeing some of them at Troopies this afternoon was great. So unfortunately, there's quite a few issues plaguing our students and our community, and with a wide variety of things. And I reached out to Barbara Green, who's the medical director of the Youth Health Connection at the Central Hospital, and she put me in touch with Sherry to talk about some of these issues that our community is facing. So I'd like to just give you a little bio on Sherry, and before I forget, there are copies of the PowerPoint on the back tables, and there's a few pens, so help yourself. Sherry is a licensed mental health counselor who possesses a background of over 27 years of experience working with women, children, and families, and has consulted or trained a number of professional areas. Her experience in a wide variety of treatment settings has enabled her to work with a diverse population, including teens struggling with depression and anxiety, people with eating disorders, patients of all ages with technology addiction and issues with healthy technology use, and women experiencing distress with children and child behavior difficulties. Relationship issues and caretaking stressors. So some of these topics will just be discussed tonight. We hope to have this done by about 6 o'clock, because I know there's a big town meeting at 7, so we'll give you time to get to that. So, Sherry, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Kate actually gave me this huge task of covering all of the mental health issues that plague our teenagers and all of the solutions in 45 minutes. So, thanks, Kate. We probably won't do all of that, but what I'm going to try to do is kind of present a bunch of information to you just to give you some background, some warning signs, some little pieces of information. If you have questions as I go along, just jot them down, and if I get all the way through the presentation and still haven't answered your question, I'm happy to stay at the end and answer questions. I know we're kind of on a time crunch. So just so I know who's in the room, how many people in the room are teachers in the district? Teachers. How many people are administrators in the district? And how many people are parents? Parent and high school nurse. Oh, and high school nurse. Oh, nurses. I should have said nurses. That's right. Did I miss any category? Clergy. Clergy. Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I have limited time to present, and I'm just going to try to quick go over these topics. I'm going to touch on depression and anxiety, other mental health issues that can be really difficult for some of our teens. Like, I have to keep looking at my slides. Sorry, it's usually in front of me, so I'm going to keep turning my back to you. I apologize. Emotional overdrive and technology, bullying and cyberbullying, eating disorders, substance use and abuse, some of those warning signs, and then what kinds of things we can do. And I have this little model that I use often, which you'll understand in a second what COPERS stands for. So let's get right into it. Why bother to do this? Well, it's pretty obvious. We know that without help, our adolescents very often are in pain, they're suffering, they're failing, and they're at risk. With help, they have a greater chance of success in their future, improved functioning, less substance abuse, and better academic achievement. So, obvious why we won't do this. To just talk a little bit about depression, you've probably heard a lot of these rumors or these comments. Oh, I've heard these things about adolescents. They're doing it just to get attention. It's a phase. They're just being teenagers. They have so much. What do they have to be depressed about? They're just being dramatic. This is actually some research that Barbara Green and Youth Health Connection, they all sort of worked together to put together an entire manual on depression and suicidality in teens. And Nadia Riley was the author of this, and these are the phrases that she kept hearing when she was asking people about depression. So, how many people think this is true? You can only develop depression if something really bad happens to you. It's false. When an adolescent suffers from depression, he or she can appear happy and enjoy things. How many people think that's true? Yeah, it's very true. Depression does not occur in teens who are very involved in school activities, sports, clubs, etc. How many people think that's true? You guys are good. See, you don't even think it's false. There are effective treatments for adolescents for depression. True. Okay, so we want to talk about what is depression. How do we know what depression is? What are we seeing? If we look at this first line that's going to come up here, it is true. A lot of our adolescents have moods that go up and down. They're sad sometimes, they're irritable sometimes. The green line sort of represents average teenage mood, right? It comes and goes. It's sometimes good and happy, sometimes not so good and happy. That's kind of normal teenage mood. The red line that's going to come up is what we're talking about when we're talking about depression. When you're thinking about depression, you really want to think in terms of intensity, severity, duration, and impact. Some of these are some symptoms that you very often see with depression. Depressed, anxious, or irritable mood. That's an important thing I want you to remember, because a lot of times when we're talking about depression in kids and adolescents, we're not just talking about sad, depressed moods. Sometimes we're talking about irritable or anxious mood. Most of the day, remember I was just saying about the intensity, the severity, the duration. Most of the day, more days than not, those are the things that we want to be thinking about. Big change or reduction in interests or pleasure in many activities. Isolated or withdrawn, feeling hopeless or helpless, significant weight gain or weight loss, insomnia or hypersomnia, they're sleeping all the time or they can't sleep at all, physically very active, cannot sit still, or very inactive, can't get up and get things done, lots of physical complaints, headaches, stomach aches, those kinds of things, fatigue or loss of energy, worthlessness or excessive and inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate, recurrent thoughts of death, and risky behaviors. We're also thinking about their internal thought process. People who suffer from depression often have distorted or negative thoughts about themselves, the world, or their future. That's that hopelessness, helplessness kind of piece. They may feel like they're not worth loving, or not smart enough, not good enough, or generally will be a disappointment. And they often refer to themselves as broken, empty, damaged, or hollow. These are all things that when I'm treating someone in a clinical setting with depression, I hear a lot of this. So when we talk about how long the symptoms have lasted, this is the severity and the duration. You have to double click each of these so they all come up. That's okay. You can do all three of them at once. 2 weeks or longer without any breaks for major depression. Severity, not able to respond to distraction or intervention. And areas of functioning, a lot of times if we're talking about clinical depression, we're seeing impairment in multiple areas, not just at home or just in school, but with friends, at home, at school, in a couple of different areas. So to sort of sum up depression is not their fault. It's a mental, medical illness. Teens do not create their depression. Sometimes it's hard to accept that you have depression. I have a lot of kids who come into my office and they want it to be something else other than depression. Even after all these years of being able to talk about depression as a medical illness that many people have had, we've seen stars that have had it, we've seen it written up in the news and in movies, and I still have teens come into my office and feel really ashamed that they're battling with depression. Anyone can develop depression. It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like or what activities you're involved in. You can't just get over it, no matter how much willpower you have. It's another piece I see a ton in my practice is people thinking, I just want to get over it. Like, I just want to be able to do these things that I used to be able to do. Come on, what do I need to do? And it's not a sign of weakness. So some more questions for you. Suicide is the third leading cause of death for people ages 15 to 24 and the second leading cause of death among college students. How many people think that's true? It's true. Research indicates that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth are at higher risk for suicide than their heterosexual peers. It's true. And it's not because there's something going on with any of those issues, it's usually related to the stigma around it. If you talk to someone about suicide, it will be putting the idea in their head. Many people think that's true. False. People who talk about suicide won't really do it, they're just talking about it to get attention. False. It's okay to break a promise of some. This is a slide I kept in because I didn't know how many teens would be in the room. There was a chance there was going to be teens in the room. And this is a message that we're constantly trying to drill into their heads, is that it is not tattling when you talk about something that's going on for a friend, or you heard a rumor that somebody that you know is feeling suicidal. It's okay to tell, so obviously that's very important. So, red flags for suicide. These are the risk factors for suicide. This does not mean that if somebody's in this category, they're highly likely to feel suicidal. It just means it's one of those things we want to consider as a risk factor. That they're depressed, that they're using alcohol or drugs, we're going to talk about that more in a second. Sexual identity, previous suicide attempts, or coming from a family where suicide attempts have been made. There's not a suicide gene. There's no such thing as a suicide gene. However, having experienced trauma can put you at higher risk. So having known or been involved with or related to people that have suicided is a risk factor. People who are gifted and talented. This is a category that a lot of people forget about. The pressure of trying to sort of keep up and maintain that sometimes creates suicide risk for people. People with learning difficulties, teen pregnancy, and victims of abuse or have a trauma history. Those are high risk factors. Clues to watch for if you're working with teens or you have friends that you're kind of, what should I look for? Verbal warnings. I've had it, I wish I was dead, you won't be seeing me around anymore, I'm tired of life. Preoccupation with death-related topics. Talking about suicide. These are things that I see often. Sudden or erratic behavior changes. Eating, sleeping, school attendance or appearance. Drastic changes in those. Withdrawal, significant losses, giving away treasured possessions and special things, tying up loose ends. Another one that I see often, aggression, rebellion, disobedience. Self-destructive behavior or taking excessive risks, increased use of drugs or alcohol, decreased interest in usual activities or increased isolation, excessive feelings of guilt, getting weapons, and sudden changes in personality. So those are our red flag risk factors. So jumping now to stress and also talking about anxiety, there's a lot of different stresses out there for our teenagers, right? There's a lot going on. So we have family stressors. These are things that are going to happen. They're not things that we can sort of protect teenagers from. There's death or losses, those can happen in a teen's life. Divorce of parents can happen, moving can happen, remarriage of a parent can happen, hospitalization or illness of a close family member, loss of employment by a parent, birth of a sibling, believe it or not, is a stress factor for siblings. Being home alone a lot while parents are working. These are all stress factors, but we all know many teenagers who have these stress factors. We also have school environment stress factors. They're always complaining about their heavy workload, right? But that's going to happen. They're going to have a lot of homework. Leaving school, going into summer, coming back to school from summer break, moving between schools, moving up from middle school to high school, or changing grades, different teachers, sort of getting used to a new environment or new ways of doing things. These are all stressors that very likely will happen in teen lives. When we start to talk about stress becoming a problem is when we see things like this. They're starting to experience this stress to such a degree that they're having headaches, backaches, insomnia. It aggravates migraines, asthma, hay fever, ulcers, stomach problems, colds. Ulcers is on there twice, and I know that, but it wouldn't let me take it out. Possible relationship between stress and heart disease, cancer, lupus, diabetes. Stress can increase behavior problems, depression, mood swings, and poor attention span. So what we want to be working on with our teenagers is understanding that stress is a normal part of life. And there's even good, healthy stress. Like the kind of stress that you feel when you're driving home after Snowmageddon and the roads are a little slippery and you're like hyper-focused on the road and you're gripping the wheel really tight. That's eustress. That's positive stress that says you need to pay attention to this and only this. We don't want to be doing anything else. We're not singing and we're not Snapchatting right now. Or the kind of stress that they feel when they do have a heavy workload that says, oh, I got to stop chatting with my friends. I've got to stop doing other things. Got to sit down and get this done. That's eustress. That's normal, healthy stress. We start to worry when we start to see some of these signs and symptoms. And we also talk about anxiety and stress and sort of that interconnection. When anxiety is excessive and emotionally and physically debilitating is when we start to kind of worry. Things that I see in my patients are frequent worries and fears, racing heart, sweaty palms, nervousness, edginess, nightmares, and panic attacks. Anxiety can be brought up by stress, that sort of increasing level of stress. And I see a lot of strong need for reassurance in a lot of my teens. It manifests both physiologically and behaviorally. Worries interfere with daily activities at school and at home. And it occurs when there's a combination of internal and external stressors that overwhelm their normal coping skills. Okay, so warning signs, again, that little red flag, warning signs for when we worry about anxiety and stress getting to too high of a degree. Out of character behaviors, agitation and easily triggered by stress. They're agitated and easily triggered by stress. They're asking a lot of what if questions. You see this a lot in younger kids. Well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this happens? A lot of worry about what could be happening. They're needing constant reassurance. I actually have several teenagers that have that. Do you think this is okay? Do you think this is the right way? Would you do it this way? If they're seeking that constant reassurance. A big symptom that we see in a lot of adolescents is decline in attention, concentration, and organization. When I'm asking them sort of about their attention, they'll say, yeah, when my teachers are talking, I have no idea what they're talking about. It's just gone. All of a sudden I look up and I think, what are we doing in this class? And it's that preoccupation in their head of their worries and their fears and what they're thinking about is interfering with everything that's being taught in the classroom. And frequent physical complaints. Perfectionism, inability to complete tasks, they sort of go hand in hand. Reluctance or refusal to go to school, sleep problems, and avoidance of different activities. So when does anxiety become a disorder? Same thing that we talked about with depression. We're looking at, is their reaction disproportionate to everybody else's reaction? Is it disruptive to their daily lives? Is it impacting multiple areas of their life? Home, school, friendships. They're experiencing a great deal of distress, and then the same thing with depression, that duration. Is it just one day that was kind of a really stressful day and they were really overreacting to things and not able to function? Or is this happening over and over and over again? So another piece I want to quickly touch on is the very, very important connection between food and mood. I'm an eating disorder therapist, so I do a lot of work with this. But it's very important that we understand, and this is very true for teenagers who are racing out the door without eating breakfast first and all that kind of stuff, that there is a connection between your food and your mood. Not eating properly can impact concentration, it can impact anxiety, it can impact feeling depressed, it can obviously impact your energy level. Eating disorders are very, very common. They are definitely something that comes into my office an awful lot. And there's lots of different types of eating disorders, but just to kind of quickly touch on them, anorexia is the refusal to maintain a minimally normal body weight, and bulimia is characterized by repeated episodes of binge eating followed by compensatory behaviors. And in both cases, there's a disturbance in the perception of their body shape or size. There's also a lot more coming out about binge eating disorder. It's a new category that's sort of been officially added to the diagnostic categories. And it's characterized by eating large amounts of food in a short period of time and a feeling of loss of control over being able to stop eating food. This is from Meta, which is a really great resource in the state of Massachusetts for information about eating disorders. If you think you know someone who has an eating disorder, I highly recommend going to their website. And this is just some signs and symptoms that you might see as someone suffering from an eating disorder. Again, not clear diagnostic category. I'm trying to go quickly through this information. Odd rituals such as cutting their food into small pieces, fear of situations involving food like graduation parties and backyard barbecues and potluck suppers, things like that. The binge eating, secretive eating, bizarre food combinations, eating very slowly or very rapidly, cooking a lot without ever eating the food, perceiving certain foods as good or bad, drinking a lot of water, excessive gum chewing, rigid or excessive exercise regimen, use of laxatives and the like, fear of becoming fat, dressing in layers to hide weight loss or gain, preoccupation with food or weight, a self-worth determined by their weight, severe self-criticism, mood shifts, social withdrawal, need for approval to feel good about themselves, and excessive bathroom use or showers. So when you see any of those things, they might cause you to have a little bit of that red flag warning sign. So steps for helping a teen who may have an eating disorder. The most important part that I want to point out on this is that eating disorders really require a team approach to treatment. The therapist, the medical person, the primary care, the nurse practitioner, and the nutritionist, and the family, and the school. It really requires everybody to work together. It's a very difficult illness to treat, and it requires a team approach. We can see that. You have this slide, so I'm just trying to get through this information quickly. So another piece that I see an awful lot in my office, and that I've been hearing a lot from parents as an issue, is about emotional overdrive and overconnection to internet technology and technology addiction. This is just one day's worth of putting up some information that's out there. Every single solitary day there's a new article, there's more research, there's a new book, there's tons of information that's coming out about internet addiction, technology addiction, technology overuse. My favorite slide. Hi, sweetie, how was school today? You can read all about it in my blog, Dad. And the reason why I put this slide up there is to say pretty much all of us in the room, unless there's a teenager in the room that walked in, are digital immigrants. This is new to us. We come to this we're not born into it. All of our adolescents are digital natives. They have been growing up with technology as an extension of themselves. So we are approaching this differently than they are. They are flooded with information in a million different ways. It all has potential good and potential negative. So let's talk for a second about the adolescent brain, because everything I've just talked about so far and then everything else I'm going to talk about is going to relate to this. The adolescent brain, we know from a ton of neurological research, is actually very different than the adult brain. They look adult, most of them look very grown up and very mature, so their body actually looks like it might be all mature and grown up, but realistically their brain is still developing into their 20s. The important piece of information in this is that the adolescent functions first from their amygdala, which is a very primary, old part of their brain that developed very early on. It's the part of their brain that's responsible for emotional responses. Sound familiar if you have teenagers? A lot of emotional responses. The prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that does planning and predictability and sort of predicting consequences and controls your impulses, is still developing into their 20s. So in adolescence, this part of their brain is still developing. When I say that, you go, oh yeah, that's right. That's what it's like to live with an adolescent. The other important thing to know about your brain, and this relates to the technology piece, is that our brains are designed to prune out information that we don't use regularly. It's kind of a use it or lose it mentality. Sort of like the bush in front of your house that you kind of see these little scraggly pieces and you don't like them and you just clip them off. Our brains do the same thing. If we have a skill and we're using that skill regularly, it continues to strengthen in our brain. If we have a skill and we're not using it regularly, our brain prunes it out. So think now about the technology piece we were just talking about. and the forms of communication and problem solving that our digital native teenagers are using. If they want to find out some information, what do? Google it. And they get an instant answer. They didn't have to wait. They didn't have to sit down and figure it out. They didn't have to go ask a couple people what they thought. They got an instant answer by Googling it. If they want to talk to their friends, how are they communicating with their friends? Text messages. So the skill of social problem solving and social skills are getting pruned out in our digital native teenagers. And it's something that when I shift back to what can we do to sort of be preventative and help our teenagers, I'm going to talk some more about. So these are just obviously obvious functions of technology and why it's great. It's terrific. We get tons of information from technology. Our kids can communicate with people all over the world. We get all kinds of information educationally for them. We can do our shopping online. We can do our banking online. We can do our bill paying online. That's great. There's wonderful parts of it, so I don't want to have anybody leave here thinking that I don't like technology. I do. I just want to develop a better balance for our teens. And this is a quote that I love. For everything you have missed, you have gained something else, and for everything you gain, you lose something else. Keep that in mind when we're talking about technology. This little list here might sound familiar. It's definitely things that I see with the parents that come into my office. My son is feeling really jittery, he's cranky, he's nasty, he's isolating, he's in his room all the time. He's, having nightmares. And when I start to do some poking around, it turns out he's playing a ton of video games. Or my daughter, not to try to be stereotypical, but my daughter is, has all these unrealistic expectations about what we should be doing and what she should own and where we should go. And I don't see her hanging out with her friends anymore, and she doesn't hang out and eat dinner with us anymore. She's really regressed, having tantrums if I try to take her, phone away at nighttime and say, sit down and do your homework. Does any of that sound familiar? Anybody ever heard any of that in your teens and kids? This is actually, with minor changes, the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. This is not about technology, but I saw so much of it coming into my office that I went, oh, wow, that actually looks a lot like that. So that's one of the things that sort of drives me to say we have to create a better balance with our teens and technology. So obviously bullying and cyberbullying is a topic that you probably have heard tons and tons about. It fits here because we're talking about technology and how easy it is to sort of increase the amount of bullying. It's invisible, it's immediate, that whole social problem solving piece I was just talking about. I'm really frustrated with so-and-so. Instead of going home and taking some time to think about it and coming up with the best solution to it, I can fire off a text really quick, or I can tweet about them, or there's sort of that immediate response. We just talked about the adolescent brain and that predicting consequences and impulsivity piece, and so put all those together and we have an increased amount of cyberbullying and bullying. I don't need to go over the consequences of bullying. I think you guys are good on that. So now let's touch on substance abuse. Mental health disorders, you were just saying this, and substance abuse very often can coexist. It's a very important piece for us to look at. When I talk to people about substance use and abuse, one of my favorite things to reference, if you haven't seen this, you need to go on YouTube and watch him, is Chris Herron. Many people have seen him speak. He speaks everywhere. But he said something to a group of teens one time that I have never been able to forget. And if you don't know who he is, he was a superstar basketball player in high school and rose up through the ranks and even played professional ball for the Celtics, and a raging drug addict and nearly died many times. And he does now all inspirational speaking on substance abuse. He basically said to this group of teenagers, I just want you to remember one thing. Recreational drug or alcohol use is the problem. There is not one single solitary person who sits in their buddy's basement with all their best friends in their red Solo cup and says, I'll probably be a drug addict. I'll probably be an alcoholic. They don't think that way. They think it's recreational, it's fun, we're hanging out, and for some of those people, it's going to become a lifelong struggle and a lifelong problem. And his video is so inspirational. If you haven't watched it, you should. The teen risk factors for developing serious alcohol and drug problems include some of the stuff that we've already been talking about. depression, low self-esteem, feeling disconnected from others, a family history, and a lack of effective use of social skills. I went to another training where a woman who did alcohol treatment talked about this, and I use this schematic with my teenagers all the time to think again about that adolescent brain and what part of their brain is still developing, right? When you drink, the first thing that alcohol affects is your forebrain, is that prefrontal cortex, the part that's responsible for planning, predicting consequences, impulse control. Now we're adding alcohol to the not completely developed part of our brain as an adolescent. Then it kicks in to the midbrain and you start losing control over emotions, balance, your senses. And then if you keep drinking, as many of them do in sort of the binge drinking issues, it starts to affect the brainstem, heart rate, body temperature, consciousness, and it can be deadly. And when I explain it this way to teenagers, first of all, they can relate to that. They've seen the slurring of speech. They've seen that sort of uninhibited piece of it. And then when they think about piece number 3, it's really scary that it can get that far. So this is a really good piece of information for adolescents to have. Warning signs of teen drug and alcohol abuse. Behavioral warning signs: irresponsible or impulsive behavior, tardiness, disobeying rules, drop in school performance, change in friendship group. Physical, fatigue, repeated health complaints, change to appearance of eyes, coloring hair, etc. Lasting cough, change in sleep or eating habits. And then the emotional red flag warnings are personality changes, mood changes, irritability, negative or defensive attitude, and depression. So I want you to think, will you flip back and forth between this slide and the next slide for 1 second? And then go back in. I want you to think about everything I was just telling you in terms of either a continuum or different color flags, whichever works for you in trying to remember it. We just talked about the fact that all teenagers are going to experience stress. All of you experience stress. We all experience stress. There is a level of reaction to that, and we can work at the intervention level of prevention. That's like the white flag. Everything's going okay. We'll just kind of be there, be aware. We're going to be supportive. We're going to make sure that we know that there's people out there that can help and give them information. They can take that information in. It's white flag. We're not really freaking out about it, but we're just being there, being aware. Then there's sort of the middle of the road, that yellow flag that says, something's going on. What's going on? I maybe need to ask more questions. I might need to pay closer attention. I might need to give them more information. I might need to be more encouraging of good eating habits, good sleeping habits, really increase their positive sense of self. Teach them relaxation and coping skills. No, you don't need to have a drink or smoke pot to relax. There's actually other ways you can do this. So that's where I'm kind of starting to intervene a little bit, but still from a preventative standpoint. Then there's clinical concerns, where we really need to intervene. Those red flag warnings that I've been talking about, where you're really concerned, we need to get some help. We need to get other people with expertise to step in here and help us. Individual therapy, medication, family therapy, group therapy, possibly an emergency room if that's where we need to go. So that's the red flag warning side. Okay, we can skip this one. So let's talk about my little plan here of what I typically do. There are a few different pieces that I'm going to go over for the rest of the time that I feel like are very helpful from a preventative standpoint and can also move into the intervention standpoint. Connection, optimism, play, empowerment, resiliency, and making sure that we have safety. The only way to have a friend is to be one. So we know our teens want to connect. That's why they're doing this all the time. Connection is very, very, very important to teenagers. We want to make sure that their connections are healthy, effective, and empowering. So this is just another one of my little slides. I need to use the computer. Hold on, let me see if anyone wrote on my Facebook wall. Nope. Now let me see if anyone replied to my Twitter. Nope. Now let me see if someone started following me on Tumblr. Nope. Done. Let me check my Facebook again. Someone could have written something in the last 30 seconds. Nope. And so she's in a little bit of a spiral, and this is just to sort sort of demonstrate the intense need for connection. So we can use that as a tool. One of the things that I work with a lot of teachers, administrators, counselors, and parents on is active listening. A way that you can listen to your teenager and connect with your teenager in a way that you can hear what they're talking about. 3 principles. Communicate interest in the person, show caring, send the message that we want to help. These are the do's and don'ts of active listening. I kept this slide in because I usually use this with professionals, but parents can do this as well. And you can see places where sometimes you might forget to do this. So looking at the don't column, don't criticize or judge. How many of us as parents, first thing we have is a nice criticism of what's going on. Don't evaluate the teenager's experience. Don't give advice too quickly. This is one I'm very guilty of as a mom. I've always got advice. I always know everything, so I've got great advice. Don't cross over boundaries. Don't try to jolt the teen into reality with scare tactics. Do provide a quiet space to talk. I love the car. Great time. It's very quiet. You can turn the radio off. Have eye contact. I can't tell you how many parents I have come into my office, and while they're talking about what's going on with their teenager, they're checking their emails and their text messages. And so how is the teenager going to know you're really invested in what's going on with them, other than to give them the eye contact that you're going to want back from them? Repeat what they're saying for understanding, and contain the conversation to your expertise. For professionals, but for parents, if it's going beyond what you don't know and don't understand, think about getting some help from some experts. So going from connection to optimism. This is a very important piece with teenagers. There's a couple components to it. One, having an optimistic attitude, and there's an entire psychology about this. Positive psychology and optimistic thinking is an entire field of psychology. Martin Seligman has written lots of books and made lots of money talking about this, but it really is very effective. One piece is thinking about their locus of control, that they have control over the decisions that they make and things that happen to them, versus always feeling like they're the victim. Oh, bad things just always happen to me. My kids that are struggling with depression very much feel like bad things just happen to them. They have no control over it, just keeps happening, I have the worst life. And so helping them start to shift that and realize you do have control over these things. You can actually have an impact on how things happen to you or how you see them. Flipping things to a positive. This is always a challenge with teenagers, but to try to get them to look at things a different way. Lack of success in something or failing at something, and being able to flip and say, well, what did you learn from that? What opportunity were you able to take from that? When challenged, they can completely do this. They can flip it around and look at it in a different light. It's the glass half full, glass half empty mentality. And changing the negative self-talk. A lot of times, especially if somebody's struggling with depression or anxiety, there's a lot of beating themselves up. Oh, I'm terrible at this, I'm never going to succeed, I stink, this is awful. And getting them to just switch how they talk about themselves, talk about the positive. Don't talk about the negative in yourself. There's more that is right with you than will ever be wrong with you. And really flipping that perspective starts to change how they feel and has a huge impact on a lot of these symptoms. This is probably my biggest go-to strategy. And you may have heard of the feel good, do good, or do good, feel good phenomenon. And it is basically a principle that says, if I feel really good, I'm going to do a lot of good things for others. And the reverse is also true. If I do good things for others, I'm actually going to start feeling good myself. I have a lot of teenagers in my practice, definitely teenagers that I run a youth group, and we do tons and tons of community service, volunteer work, and I call it the bright, shiny face effect. When you're coming into a place, whether it's every single week, every Tuesday you go in and you help little kids with their homework, or you help people take care of animals, or you read to the elderly, or you feed people in a soup kitchen, or you just go once and you help rebuild a house, or you help feed somebody who's hungry, or you do some work with the local food pantry. When you walk in and you're volunteering to help, you get the bright, shiny face. You get somebody going, ah, thank God you're here. That has a huge impact on how somebody feels about themselves. So I am the biggest proponent of this, and I have pretty much everyone that I see in my practice eventually working on doing some volunteer work. because there is some amazing connection between the feel good and the do good and what it does for them. So the analogy I always give to people when I'm talking about the feel good, do good is I'm a huge Red Sox fan. I go to a lot of Red Sox games. I've been going for years and years and years. And I always marvel at the fact that somewhere about the 6th, 7th inning, a couple of goofy guys over in the bleachers are running around going like this. And it starts off and about 5 people do the wave, and then 50 people do the wave. Eventually, every game, for as long as I've been going, the seating capacity of Fenway is somewhere around 36,108, somewhere around there. 36,108 people are doing the wave. Every single time I go. And most of us who go to a lot of games are like, oh, here we go. But we'll still do it. Once a few people kind of start to motivate the process, it starts to go around. And the same is true about that feel good, do good phenomenon, is it just starts to grow and they start to feel better and better. Another piece of my Cooper's model is the P for play. This involves a couple of different pieces. First of all, perspective. Good morning, Lord. Good Lord, morning. We can look at it from the positive standpoint, or we could look at it from the negative. This person's going to have, this little girl is going to have a wonderful day. He's not starting off so well. But also having a sense of humor. There's actually research and there's DBT strategies that look at smiling and laughter and the message that sends to your brain. When you are able to sort of have fun and laugh and smile, it changes your body chemistry. And so it is a really effective strategy. The other piece that I use with play a lot with my patients is using your senses. That when you're struggling with anxiety, it's particularly effective with anxiety, and you're having a really hard time, you're feeling a lot of stress, you're struggling with stress, those physical manifestations of stress, and you start to tell your brain to absorb sensory information, your body starts to calm down. Our sensory processing is a very core part of our processing. We've been able to smell and taste and hear and see since the creation of man, whenever you think that was. But technology and all these other higher order things have come along since then. So our senses are very primary process. If somebody's feeling anxious and stressed and they pull out their favorite smelling hand lotion and put their hand lotion on, or snuggle up in their soft, snuggly blanket and listen to their favorite song. Or my favorite trick is to take a navel orange and stick it in the freezer. And when they're feeling really anxious, they pull the frozen orange out of their freezer and they feel it. It's cold and it's hard, and oh, by the way, getting a little damp and dewy, and it smells like an orange. That's a lot of sensory information in one sitting. And if I'm feeling anxious, and my brain now starts to, instead of tightening up and feeling really anxious, starts to go, wow, that's wet and dewy, and it's hard, and it's cold, and it smells like an orange, the brain starts to kind of open up and allow them to settle down and look at things a little bit differently. Then they can go back to some of my other strategies, like flipping it to the positive, looking at it differently, changing their self-talk, because the anxiety isn't tightening up so much. So using your senses under the category of play is a very effective tool. You can skip to this one. Empowerment and resilience go hand in hand for me. Empowerment is not only empowering the person to realize that they have the ability to change their self-talk, to control what happens around them to some degree. It's also getting them to sort of work together and look at their environment. Do we have an environment that's really tolerant of bullying or criticism of our peers? Do we have an environment that's really tolerant of binge drinking and sort of empowering some change? In order to have sort of the energy and ability to do that, we also want to build up the resilience. Resilience is like a superpower against stressors. It really protects you against stressors. And the resiliency attitude that I've already been talking about is what is right with you is more powerful than anything that will ever be wrong with you. And it's a very powerful concept where I've had patients literally say to me, wow, I've never thought about it like that. It's true for everyone in this room. It's true for everyone that you will meet. What is right with you is always going to be more than whatever could be wrong with you. Focusing on their strengths rather than their problems and weaknesses helps them sort of turn some of those pieces around. And we're going to flip to the resiliency builder menu, and I'll give you an example of how we do that. So this is the resiliency builder menu. And if you look down the bottom at perseverance, who every single staff that ever dealt with this young person would say, oh my God, he's so stubborn. He's so stubborn. He will not complete anything we ask him to do. He digs his heels in the sand. You've all heard of somebody like that. And we flipped it around and started calling it perseverance. And we talked about his ability to keep going no matter what the cost. And it got everybody starting to look at it a little bit differently. And teachers had a more positive attitude, parents had a more positive attitude, and the kid actually started to have a more positive attitude and started to kind of use that strategy for good versus evil of fighting the schoolwork. So any of these you could look at, you could say, oh, I can see how that could be a negative, how that could be something that's problematic for them. Let's see if we can flip it around and make it a resiliency builder and say, this is a strength of yours. Let's use this in the right direction. So data clearly shows early identification, intervention, and referral are key. That's why we're here. That's why we're trying to do this, is to start to kind of give you little bullets of information to say, how do we help keep our teenagers safe? How do we recognize some of those early warning signs? And where do we go to get some help and support to solve them? We want to reduce stigma around asking for help for any of these problems. We want to increase intervention and referral, and we want to increase access to care. This is in your slides, so I'll let you guys look at that. These are just some numbers that, especially Suicide Prevention Hotline and our local Crisis Stabilization Service, so you have those. And then just to kind of sum it all back up again, making sure that we have an effective support network for connection, flipping things to the positive for optimism, using your brain in a different way for play, having a can-do attitude for empowerment, having the ability to deal with whatever comes your way with resilience, and above all, feeling safe is imperative for the emotional well-being and mental wellness of our teens. And I'll end with my starfish story. I know you've heard this 100 times before, but it's kind of like, why do you do this? Why do you have these talks? Why do you meet with kids? And this is the story of the starfish. If you haven't heard it, the story basically goes that a man is walking down the beach, and then he looks ahead and he sees this little kid throwing something back into the ocean over and over and over again. And he finally gets up to the child and he sees that he's taking the starfish off the sand and throwing them back in the ocean, and he says, why are you doing that? There's hundreds of starfish. You can't possibly save them all. And the child bends over and picks up the starfish, and without saying a word, throws it back into the water, and he said, made a difference for that one, didn't I? And that's kind of my philosophy about every little step of the way we can make a difference. We're on a tight time constraint, but I will stay around for some questions if anybody has questions. Chris Herron. It's in the slides. Yeah, it's his correct spelling of his last name is in the slides.
So I do want to thank you all for coming. I know from the clergy to administration to teachers to parents to neighbors, community members, we're a united front. We're here to help our neighbors and everyone in the community. I have a lot of pride for this community, and when I was talking to a few people in the Frollo on what I could do or try to help to answer some of these questions or to address some of the issues that are happening, bringing in a speaker to start the conversation, to get rid of the taboos of talking about suicide and eating disorders and everything else, and to put it out there. And these are things that are coming up every day. We're sitting there nodding, going, oh, we've seen this, we saw this yesterday, we're going to see it tomorrow. Hopefully, if we can address them together through all parts of the community, hopefully we can put an end to some of these, or at least provide a light at the end of the tunnel for some of these students and people that are suffering. So let us know if you have any questions. There are handouts in the back. My email is all over the internet now from this, so don't hesitate to ask. And I'm going to pitch, we have a wellness committee, and we're going to be looking for a new community member. The woman that's doing it now is retiring from that, And if anyone would be interested, we meet a couple times a year, and I'd love to have someone from the community involved. So if anyone is interested, please don't hesitate to ask. That's it. Oh, sure, I'll talk to you about it. So we meet a couple times a year, and we're wellness policy.